So I have the rough shape of the mug complete. I can continue to tweak this, and I actually started to modify the bottom a little bit more, and I left the top. So I can live with the shape for now. The next step is I really want to start to apply some basic materials to this. Now remember, I'm working in layers, and I have my mug layered soloed, so I'm going to undo the solo. And it's really important at this point, particularly when I'm working inside my desk scene, I got to make sure that I'm saving as I go. And I definitely want to save incremental, so I want to bump up that version number. And at this point, because I'm modeling in the same project file at this point, I'm not going to be doing these independent files. I'm going to work in layers. I really want to stay on top of saving incremental to the point where probably every hour I'll save incremental. Now the source file for Cinema 4D shouldn't be very big. This is all procedural stuff, so you're going to be the very small file sizes. It's the renders that start to get pretty big. So I want to apply a material to this. I want to start off with the basic color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move from modeling to the standard layout, and I'm going to create a new texture by double-clicking in the material manager, and I'll double-click on that material to open it up in the material editor, and I'll just call this this is the mug color. And the color that I'm going to choose, I mean, the color is completely up to you, but I'm going to go, somewhere like a, kind of like a, maybe like a, kind of a darker yellow, kind of like a mustard yellow or orange. Maybe I'll even go a little bit darker. For now, I can always jump back in and change this. So I have this kind of mustard color. I'm going to throw a little reflection on this. This is going to be a ceramic cup. It's not going to be so reflective that it looks like metal. I'm going to take the brightness of that reflection down, and I'm just looking at the preview here, and I can see that it's picking up a little bit of a reflection from the environment, and I can always take that back down if I need to. I'll be a little heavy-handed with the reflection for the sake of the demo, so you can see it more clearly, and that looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that as my mug color. I'll drag and drop it. I'm going to apply the mug color to the actual mug object. I could drop it on the hyperNURBS, but I get a little bit more control when I apply it to the actual geometry. Remember, because the hyperNURBS is modifying the geometry, and even though that could receive a material, I want to take advantage of the actual geometry itself. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I want to apply an additional material to this object. So I'll give this a quick render just to see what it looks like in my scene. Under the lit conditions, and I'll see what the reflection looks like, and I'll pause this while it's rendering. Of editing, here we are with a quick render, and it looks okay. It's a little too reflective for my taste, but I'll tone that down a little bit later. And also, as I'm looking at this, the proportion of the mug doesn't feel right. I feel like it's too wide. It's like kind of like a big clunky cappuccino mug, and I want something that's a little bit smaller. So I'll go back and correct for that in just a little bit. But the next thing that I want to do is I want to apply some kind of a logo to this. And if you look inside your texture folder, or inside your desk scene, inside your text folder, I've included one example, which is a starbucks.psd. Now you can go find your own content, you can make your own logo. I've included the Starbucks logo just as something that you can demo with, and in fact I'll switch this up here I'll switch this up shortly. Cinema 4D likes Photoshop documents. It also likes JPEGs and TIFFs and PNG. Now, one of the advantages of working in .psd or a Photoshop document, is I'll just pop this open, or as a PNG file, is that we can preserve a layer of transparency. Now, as I open up this Starbucks logo inside Photoshop, let's try that again. There it is. When I look at this logo, there's a couple of things that's going on. In the background, there's this checkerboard pattern, and that's the Photoshop or Adobe's language for no pixels. So this is actually transparent. So the only thing that is opaque is the positive shape of this logo. It's a round logo. And I'll leave this open in Photoshop, and I'll jump back into Cinema 4D. And what I'm going to do is I'll create a new texture. I'll double click on this new texture, and I'll call this Starbucks logo. In the color channel, rather than loading a color through the swatch, what I'll do is in textures, just like we did for the Apple texture, I'll load this Starbucks logo. Now the Starbucks logo is being applied. Now we're going to have a little bit of a glitch here if we apply this straight out of the box, but I do want to demonstrate applying two different textures to the same object. I'll click drag and drop onto the mug object. Now if we look at the object manager, we have these material tags. I have the first material tag, which is the color, the base color. And then I have this logo that I applied, and these there's an importance to the order. If I click and drag and I move these, where I drag the color to the right, now what I have is from left to right, I have the logo has been applied first, and then on top of that we have the mug color, which is not at all what we want. So I want the base color of the mug to show up first, and then I want the logo on top of that. Now I got a couple of different glitches happening. One is that my logo is big and huge. It's tiling, it's repeating, and in fact it is not transparent. I'll cross the transparency bridge in just a moment. What I want to do is select the material tag, make sure it's highlighted in the object manager, and if I go down here and look at the tag properties, what I can do is I can start to modify its projection type. Now by default, when we've modeled something, the projection type for a texture tends to be, or at least for a bitmap, or a graphic, is a UVW mapping. Now UVW mapping is a three-dimensional coordinate system that corresponds to X, Y, Z. So just like we can build a model in 3D, we can also modify textures in a 3D space. We'll talk more about that later. What I want to do is I want to change its projection type from UVW to something that's a little bit more manageable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the material type or the projection type that is more similar to the object that I've built. And I could apply something like a cubic texture. That's not exactly what I want. I could try a shrink wrap. What I want is something spherical, or more appropriately cylindrical. Now when I apply a cylindrical material, what you can see is that it's being wrapped in cylindrical fashion. So this is kind of like a cylinder. In fact, that's the shape that I started out with. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that tile is turned off. So I don't want this texture tiling. I want one instance of that tile. And what I can do is I can start to play with the offset of U. And as I click and drag those around, you can see that it's actually rotating the texture. I can change the offset of V. And now I'm not going to change this too much, because what I want to do is I want to start to reduce the length of U, and you can see that it's wrapping that material over to the left side. And so what I'll do now is I'll push the offset, and I'll play back and forth between these two values of the U length and the offset to make sure that I can see my logo and it's positioned properly. I'll do the same thing with Y. Now I don't want to jump too fast with this, because if I move this way down and change this value dramatically, I might lose the texture or lose my reference to the texture. So I'm just kind of playing these values back and forth. I'm making sure that it's not stretching or skewing the texture too dramatically. And it's kind of hard to see because this is, starting to fall inside of a shadow. But I'll give that a quick render. Edit, here we are, and you can see that more or less that's positioned almost where I want it. I want to move it down and maybe over. But I'm getting like a couple of different artifacts that I want to correct for. The first one, and the most obvious one, is that I'm not seeing the transparency for this logo. The other thing is I'm getting some really jagged edges, and we can fix that in our render options. But let me fix the transparency issue first. And the way that I'll fix this is I'll jump back into the material. Inside this material, what I want to do is I want to turn on the alpha channel. So a lot of times when you come into contact with this term alpha, whether you're using Flash or Photoshop or GameSalad or Unity, we're talking about opacity or a transparency layer, and the alpha layer or the alpha channel of an image tends to deal with the transparency. And so what I can do is turn on alpha, and what I could do is I could actually import, I could make an image, but in this case I can just actually dig in and import the Starbucks logo and use that as the alpha. And so what it's doing is it's reading the positive shape and setting that to white, and it's reading the negative shape and setting that to black. And once we go back and look, and now even just through the preview, I can see that it's now knocking out the white background. So if I were to render that, it would come up pretty decent. Now I do want to continue to manipulate my logo just a little bit to get a little bit closer to where I want it. So that's pretty much where I want it. Maybe I'll even push it down a little bit lower. The other thing that I had to deal with is I saw some jagged edges that were popping up, and that has to do with the anti-aliasing of the image. And in fact, any image that you've rendered inside Cinema 4D is going to have trouble rendering things like edges that should be feathered, or transparencies that should have a certain degree of detail or nuance to them. And if I go into my render settings, what I can do is go into the anti-aliasing tab and change the anti-aliasing setup from geometry to best. I won't mess with the minimum and maximum levels because I could pay a price for that, and the default settings should work just fine. And now what we're doing is we're getting anti-aliasing applied to our render that takes into account things like transparent edges and transparencies and things that have to be blended in a more sophisticated way. So I'll give this a quick render, and now I'm getting a really nice clean application of that material onto my mug. I do need to fix my mug, and I could do that really quickly simply by I might select the mug object, go into scale, make sure that I'm in model mode, and rather than scaling this according to all three axes at the same time, I'm going to scale this according to Z and X at the same time by rolling over this green bracket here and just scaling that down just a little bit. Now I'm changing the proportions of that. It did modify the way that my my handle looks in this scene, but again, I never did refine that upper edge of that handle. I just really kind of focused on the bottom to show you the difference. And here in the HyperNerbs cage, we can really see the effects of that. I'll give that one last render. And that's looking pretty good. So I would recommend that you continue to experiment. You use the Starbucks logo for placement only, and then you go out and find a logo that you can modify. And I'll just show you very quickly. If I were to download some kind of graphic that either, or make a graphic, maybe I design my own logo, or I have another logo that I've designed in a previous course, or maybe I find something online that I want to make a mug out of. I want to mock up a mug, and so, you know, maybe I'm working in a branding class, or maybe I find this Adventure Time logo, and I want to turn this into a transparent logo. Well, if I have a JPEG and I'm inside Photoshop and I'm looking at a background that's locked, if I try to delete, if I try to make some kind of selection, and I try to delete the background to get to a transparency, by default it's not going to let me. It's going to just fill it in with another color. Let me deselect. If you want to pick up and modify some kind of existing graphic, what you can do is open it up in Photoshop, double click on the thumbnail, and just rename it the layer. That'll unlock the layer and change it from a background layer. A background layer in Photoshop is very specific. It means that you can't delete to transparency. You delete to a background color. The minute that we have renamed that layer and unlocked it, when I delete, you can see this checkerboard pattern appear. That means that there's no pixels in that part of the layer. I'll just jump around, and whether I erase this content manually, or whether I go through and just deselect it, or erase the information that I want, I now have the positive shape of a logo. I'll give this a quick file save as. I'll save this as a Photoshop document, or the alternative is that I could save this as a PNG or a PNG file. Somewhere in here I should see a PNG. I don't see it, but that's okay. I want to save it as a Photoshop document anyway. So probably in the color mode of this graphic, it's probably not supporting a PNG, so I'd have to go into some of the image properties, or maybe I'm just not seeing it. Whatever. I should see a Photoshop PNG. I don't see it, but anyhow, I want a Photoshop document. I'll hit save. I'll say okay. So now this is something that I could now load in as a texture the same way that I did the Starbucks logo. So experiment with that, play around with it, make sure that you model the mug in an appropriate way, apply two different textures, the base color, and then some kind of a logo, either one that you've created or one that you've appropriated. And we'll catch up in the next presentation and continue to talk about other things like we'll model a soda can, and we'll also model a book. And then at that point, I think we'll have enough information inside our project, or we have enough tools to continue to populate our desk in a meaningful way. We'll think about the environment. We'll make one more quick pass at our environment about lighting and rendering. And I think we'll have everything that we need to successfully complete this project. So we'll catch up in the next presentation.